is a graphic artist who has been working in the Pacific Northwest for more than 35 years. He currently works for the Montana Historical Society designing Montana, the magazine of Western history, and books published by the Montana Historical Society Press. Prior to this, Luke served as the art director for Montana Outdoors magazine, published by Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. He also operates Element L Design, a freelance graphic design business specializing in brand identity and design for nonprofits. Luke lives in East Helena.
Thank you. Well, first I want to congratulate all of you tonight for making the decision to come to my dog and pony show instead of watching the State of the Union address. I can guarantee you this will be much more entertaining, maybe even enlightening. We'll have to see. So thank you guys for coming. The most important question of the night, Edner, does the library carry your books?
They do have them.
Excellent. Glad you're here. We've got a rock star in our presence here tonight. Okay. Let's get this rolling. Thank you very much to the Missoula Public Library for asking me to come and present to you tonight. I gave a variation on this presentation last summer at the Montana History Conference, and they asked me to come as a result of that. So I'm very grateful to be in such a beautiful space with you guys in beautiful Missoula tonight. Thank you. You are here, I hope, for graphic design of the WPA, so we are going to embark on that. So this is me. My name is Luke, and yes, I like Chinese takeout, and that's me. I work for the Montana Historical Society. As mentioned, specifically, I have an office in the brand spanking new Montana Heritage Center. So have any of you been there yet? Okay. Couple of you? Excellent. Just to give you a little sneak preview, I strongly encourage all of you to make a pilgrimage down to Helena and check out this, this gorgeous new space. It's completely revamped. It's a new space. Lots and lots of artifacts and historical items are on exhibit for the very first time. And there's an entire gallery devoted to their modern art collection, none of which has ever been on display before. So it's worth the trip. Even I, working there every day, it's much more than a day to see everything, but at least come for a day and check it out. It's quite a place, and I'm very, very proud to work for this organization now. So, as mentioned, I work for the Montana Historical Society Press. So I do all the layout and graphic design for the books that we publish. Our latest one, History of Montana in 101 Places, was published this last fall, and there's a copy of it on the table there if you want to check it out. And then I also art direct Montana, the magazine of Western history, and that is a quarterly publication. There's a couple of issues on the table as well. Feel free to peruse those. So I've been there getting close on to 3 years, and it's a lovely gig. Before that, for almost 25 years, I was the art director for Montana Outdoors magazine, and if any of you are familiar with that, it's published by Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. That was a labor of love for me for multiple decades. I really enjoyed it, but I'm glad I landed at the Historical Society now. So, as mentioned, on the side, outside of my job, I run Element L Design. It's a freelance design business out of my home. I mostly do identity work, brand work, logos, if you will, and I like to work for nonprofits. That's kind of where my heart is and where I like to put my energy, my creative energy towards. So I've been doing that for a long time. And this is how I feel, going to work every single day. I can't believe they pay me to be creative and to express myself and to help communicate fun messages graphically. It's really a dream job for me. So, everybody knows what a graphic designer is, or at least has a rough idea. We are in constant pursuit of visual inspiration. There's really not much originality, to be honest, out there these days. All good ideas come from something that came before it. So we are constantly on the prowl for visual inspiration. And I'll just share a couple of things, me personally, what inspires me in graphic design and kind of gives me purpose and direction to the work that I do. I love classical and sacred art. I love the masters. That's in photography and painting and poetry, all of that. I really like typography. You know, that is the graphic designer's secret weapon. And typography is 50% of the game when it comes to graphic design. It's about the message, the words, and the communication end of it. And it just blows me away that with 26 letters in our English alphabet, how many ways we can portray those letters. It's infinite. It's really incredible. I love travel, and I love foreign destinations and foreign architecture and culture. Always inspired by that. I love to travel. And I love food. I love everything about food. I love eating it. I love tasting it, smelling it, looking at it, cooking it, serving it. There's just a lot there that I personally get inspired of. Who else likes food in here? Yeah, right? Right? Maybe a universal thing there. So, okay. Let's go back in time a little bit. I want to share with you a little bit of my origin story and how I landed up where I'm at and how I got interested in the WPA. So that's me. I think I was 6 or 7 years old. I just caught my very first rainbow trout out of the Yellowstone River. My family moved to Livingston from the Los Angeles area when I was a little kid, this area, and we've made our home for 50 years there since. I was a really nerdy kid. I was really into Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom and my chemistry set and reading the Little House books. And yeah, I was a nerd, but a happy nerd. And then this happened. I had an epiphany in February of 1980. I was 10 years old, and I got on the school bus because we lived a few miles out of town. And an older kid on the school bus put in an 8-track of Back in Black from AC/DC. It had just come out. Anybody remember 8 tracks? That's kind of going back a ways. Yeah. And when he put that in, it just blew me away because I grew up on mariachi music. I'm half Mexican, and a lot of classical music. That was kind of what we played in our home. Maybe a little bit of soul music, maybe a little bit of mamas and papas, but I'd never heard this. And it blew me away. I'd never heard rock music. But even better, I begged my mom to take me to the Kmart in Bozeman to buy this album. And I didn't know anything about it. I just knew the band was AC/DC and the album was called Back in Black. And when you first got this album, when it was first printed, even the outline on the letters of AC/DC weren't there. There was no white outline. It was a purely tactile feeling album. It was just embossed letters on there and nothing else. It was just solid black. And that just connected for me at that moment. I fully realized and appreciated the power of graphic design. So here's a fully black album cover. There's no imagery, no photos of what the band looked like, no clue of what the music sounded like, but the power of that design really, really appealed to me. And I was in about 6th grade or so when that happened. So this is where I went with it. I loved 80s heavy metal album covers and the music. I loved the rock and roll too. I loved the fanciful fantasy of it, the bright colors, the imagery, the typography. There was just so much magic and mystery to these album covers that's what I wanted to do. So I started drawing mythical creatures on my peachy notebooks in school and recreating band logos with my pencils. And what I didn't realize at the time, I'm in middle school, is I'm self-training. I'm training myself to be a graphic designer, learning about logo design and illustration. And it was a great jumping off point. I also taught myself how to play bass guitar because I wanted to play the music that I was appreciating as much as looking at the album covers. And I still play bass today. It's another passion. You can't make a living at it, so I'm a graphic designer. But yeah, so back to these album covers. And here's our connection to the WPA, if you can make one. I wanted to know more about the artists behind these albums. Who was designing these? who were these mythical figures. And it turned out they were a lot of the same artists who were also designing movie posters at the time, very sensational stuff, Hollywood stuff. So artists like Ralph McQuarrie, who did the original conceptual art for Star Wars, and Tom Young, who actually illustrated those very first early Star Wars posters. Isn't that beautiful stuff? I mean, it's just incredible to me. So then I wanted to know, well, who inspired these guys? Because we're talking 1970s here is when these guys were prolific at this work. And it turns out they were inspired by the work about 10, 15 years before them. And that was the designers, many of them nameless, who were designing the travel posters for TWA and the rail companies and Amtrak, all the companies, transportation companies, encouraging visitors to go west and to see these spectacular places. And you can kind of start to see a connection with the WPA look here. So, these are some of these, here's some that were specific to Disneyland, from Greyhound, from some of the rail companies. And who were these artists? Well, they were artists like Mary Blair, who worked directly for the Disney company, her beautiful illustration style. And Bjorn Aronson, who we know literally nothing about. We just know his name, but we also know that he designed these initial ride posters for Disneyland. Unfortunately, he's been lost to history, so if anybody's looking for a fun history project to pursue, see if we can figure out who that guy is, because all we have is a name. So who were they inspired by? These guys in the 50s and 60s working for Disney? Well, it turned out they were inspired by the artists 15, 20 years before them who were working for the WPA. And that's how we land here. There's some WPA employees hard at work on their silkscreen press. And this is what they did. This is what they created. These beautiful, beautiful pieces of art. Thousands of them, if you will. So let's just take a moment and appreciate a few of these. Probably the most familiar to most of us are the national park posters, and I'm going to do a deep dive into those tonight. But here's just a couple more of them. Anybody want to throw out what they're seeing in these, what speaks to them, some commonalities that they're noticing about this style? What do you guys see? I'm going to hold your feet to the flame here. What do you see? Yes? Larger than life. What a great perspective on that. Yes. Yes, big, bold energy. Yeah. Simple colors, right? Very simple. And that has a lot to do with the technology at the time of laying down one color of ink at a time. How about the message? Very simple, right? Just a few curt words to get the message across. They didn't have space on a poster to write a whole paragraph to explain a message, just a headline that was supposed to grab your attention and instantly explain what that poster was about and what it was trying to convey to you. There's a few more of them. Just really beautiful. This is what we call the WPA art style, even though there really isn't one specific art style to it. It's really more of a time period, those late 1930s to 1940s, because there were hundreds of artists that contributed to these designs. It wasn't just one or two figures cranking all this stuff out. I mean, there's 35,000 different poster designs that they produced. But they do have some visual commonalities to them. That simple messaging, kind of stark, straight imagery, very simple colors, and it all works. And when we look at these days, it's like, yeah, that's the WPA style. So I want to start the journey of how we came to the WPA studios with the Hayden expedition. Anybody familiar with that? This was, yeah, good, I see some hands. This was a U.S. Geological Survey sent out by President Grant shortly after the Civil War. And the brilliance of this group is that there were all kinds of people on this team. There was geologists, there was climatologists and meteorologists, there were artists, there were biologists, there were map makers, cartographers. And they all journeyed up. They started in southern Utah, and made their way up through Wyoming into southern Montana and ended up in what we now know as Yellowstone country. And along that journey, they were really smart, besides the scientists, to bring like a photographer. So William Henry Jackson, very well-known photographer at the time, was part of this expedition, took some of the very first photographs of Yellowstone National Park. There's another piece from him. Isn't that gorgeous? God, what a great image. There was cartographers, like I mentioned, Henry Wood Elliott, who did some of the very first topographic maps of that area, that region. He was also a watercolorist. Most of his career after the Hayden expedition, he went north to Alaska and did 40 years of research and art and science, mainly on seals, if you will, in the Anchorage area on the coast. But he contributed these beautiful images, that's Yellowstone Lake, way back in 1871. And then many of you will probably be familiar with the great Thomas Moran, a very celebrated artist, fine artist, who painted these wonderful, incredible scenes of Yellowstone. That's a pretty popular one there, the Grand Canyon. So what happened after this expedition? Well, they went back to DC and to Congress, and they showed the results of their work, the maps and the art and the images, and these started to circulate around Congress, and they realized what a special, magical place Yellowstone was, and perhaps it needs to be preserved. So that art, those visuals, helped along President Grant to sign the Yellowstone National Park Protection Act, which is establishes pretty much America's first national park. There's a couple more significant dates that happened after this. So with Teddy Roosevelt, there he is as the Roosevelt Arch was being built near Gardner and Mammoth. He signed in the Antiquities Act into law, which basically said we're providing space and money to preserve more spaces, more special areas, more landscapes across the country. And then 20 years later, Woodrow Wilson signs the Organic Act into law, which establishes the national park system. So those three acts really are where we're at today. And of course, there's been modifications and improvements and de-improvements over the years, but because of those three acts, we have this great national park system today. So these aren't all, but these are many of the national parks that were established soon after Yellowstone. Does anybody see what is common about many of these? Yes, they're all in the western half of the United States. And if you look, this is turn of the century, late 1870s to early 1900s. This is a time when people are still riding horses. There's no automobiles, there's no highway system. There's a little bit of train activity, but not a ton. There was, I guess, for mining a little bit before that. So because of that, the train companies took advantage of this. Come see these beautiful new national parks that we have in the West and ride the rails to get there. So these are very early advertisements from Union Pacific, Great Northern Railroads. These are about 1910 or so. So initial advertising to encourage people to go west. Later they turned into these, some brochures that the railroad companies were producing, further using that artwork and encouraging people to spend their money and travel. So then this happened. We all know what this is. So this is, what, late 1920s, and the Dust Bowl hits and basically shutters all travel west with the railroads and launches us into the Great Depression. And as we all know, super high unemployment, people were starving, they couldn't make a living, they lost their jobs. So because of that, Franklin Delano Roosevelt pledges the New Deal, and this is in 1932 for the American people. And I had to include Mrs. Roosevelt too in this because we all know she was also the president at the same time, at least in my opinion. And what he established, one of his first acts, was the Public Works Administration. This is the PWA, not the WPA. And what this was big ideas, huge, massive infrastructure projects. This was the National Industrial Recovery Act of 1933, and it ushered in those giant projects like Hoover Dam, like the Lincoln Tunnel, and here in Montana, Fort Peck Dam, Fort Peck Reservoir. These were all PWA projects that were putting people back to work. 2 years later, the Supreme Court established that it was unconstitutional. And I don't know the full details of it, but it has a lot to do with how that money was being allocated and spent, and basically made it a moot point. Those projects continued. Obviously, we have Hoover Dam and Fort Peck Reservoir today. But Roosevelt took another crack at this with the Works Progress Administration. And actually, it started out as the Works Projects Administration and was quickly changed that name to the Progress Administration. This, in 1935, focused more on people and creating jobs and putting people to work. So it's not always all about giant infrastructure projects. Now it's about the smaller things. A couple of scenes of people getting jobs and going to work. And as you can see, it was available to everybody. Lots of diversity in the WPA, Native Americans and African Americans and Italians and all the people who needed jobs at the time. One tangent of that, or part of that WPA program, was the CCC, or the Civilian Conservation Corps. This worked in tandem with the WPA. They were sort of sibling agencies. Many times they shared offices together. Many of the people floated back and forth of the work with it. So here's two guys, CCC Corps, carving out rocks for the Going to the Sun highway there. Anybody recognize that mountain? There you go. Yes, this is the Hidden Lake Trail, a WPA, actually a CCC project that exists today. Those were the folks breaking and busting that trail way back in the 1930s, and this is what we still have today. Lots of projects in Montana. The Great Falls Civic Center was a WPA building that was built. In Madison County, the Twin Bridges area, there's 5 grand wooden structures that comprise the Madison County Fairgrounds there. That was a WPA project. The Creston Fish Hatchery up near Kalispell, also WPA. And 10,000 bathrooms and outhouses. They built a lot of outhouses in Montana. Why? Because this is the 1930s. We still didn't have indoor plumbing for a lot of places at the time. So there's two. There's what they call the Comfort Station at Lewis and Clark Caverns State Park, and the Gehring Ranch Outhouse. All in all, this is sort of a summary of some of those projects that the WPA did in Montana. They employed over 14,000 workers who had jobs, 7,300 miles of roads that they paved. And then there's swimming pools and schools and hatcheries and playgrounds and public centers and all those bathrooms. But lots and lots of fantastic WPA architecture and projects that exist to this day, some here right in Missoula. Also part of the WPA, this is the one that I'm fascinated with, Federal Project Number 1. And I'd like to read this because of how profound the message is. In time of need, the artist, no less than the manual worker, is entitled to employment as an artist at the public expense, and that the arts, no less than business or agriculture and labor, are and should be the immediate concern of the ideal commonwealth. Don't you love the emphasis that they put on creativity and art and recognizing its value to our country? I wish a lot of our leaders thought that way today, frankly. So Federal Project Number 1 was a tiny chunk of money, but it was a profound amount. It was $27 million, allocated into 5 different silos of art, music, theater, writing, and historical preservation. $27 million. That barely builds a parking lot these days. But the impact that it had on the WPA and at that time was it's just priceless. So that's a mural from the great Diego Rivera, which was part of Federal Project Number 1 in the art project. So here's some of those people getting put to work, sculptors, muralists, and paintings. If you go down to Mammoth in Yellowstone National Park, these two beautiful bear sculptures out in front of the post office, those were a WPA art project that were created, and you can still enjoy those and rub their heads today. Many prolific creatives came out of the WPA, among them writers like Saul Bellow and John Steinbeck, both employed by the WPA. There was theater people and directors like Orson Welles. Awesome photographers like the great Walker Evans and Dorothea Lange. You may be familiar with some of her work. There were the modern artists like Rothko and Jackson Pollock, both working for the WPA, and William de Kooning. And I want to call out him because in our brand new Heritage Center in Helena, the museum I was talking about, we have de Koonings and we have Pollock. We have their actual artwork in this new modern art gallery that's on display right now. It's called the Changing Gallery. I left lots and lots of little postcards here at the table that talks about our new museum. Feel free to take one of those on your way home. I also have some of the newsletters that we produce by the Historical Society that has some of this information about these exhibits and these artists in it. So feel free to take those on your way out. Illustrators, book illustrators like Vera Bach. Pablita Velarde, an illustrator, one of my personal favorites. She was a Pueblo Indian, Native American from the Southwest who did these wonderful illustrations that you can still see at Mesa Verde National Park, at the Santa Fe Airport, at the Smithsonian, of course. A lot of her work is still out there. She was a WPA artist. The great Joe Mora, who was a cartographer and a sculptor, did these great pieces in California. He did some fantastic maps, really illustrative maps, even on Montana, that are out there. I implore you to seek his work out. Even comic book artists like Mac Raboy, the Flash Gordon artist, worked for the WPA. There were the muralists like Jacob Lawrence, Diego Rivera, as I mentioned, there with his equally talented wife, Frida Kahlo. Lots and lots of mural projects that you still see. Fine artists like Grant Wood, Thomas Hart Benton. Does anybody know what this painting is? Familiar with it? Yay, you got it. Yeah, this is Lewis and Clark, land at Eagle Creek. Thomas Hart Benton probably never came to Montana, but he sure captured that beauty of the Missouri River, right? That's the White Cliffs area of central Montana. A fanciful take on it, but I think it's quite beautiful. He was a WPA artist. So was Blanche Grams. And now we're getting into the graphic design component. Blanche Grams was an artist, an illustrator, and a poster designer. She worked for the WPA, as did Alice Selenkoff, another one. And you can see some of that work behind her in their studio. There they are at their draft tables, hard at work designing the next posters that they would be producing. These are my tribe. These are the graphic artists here. And here's some of the work that they produced. A lot of different subject matters, even syphilis. But basically what the WPA posters served as was public service announcements. They were PSAs. So their motive, their mission was to promote positive messages to help get our country back on its feet. Remember, we're not quite into World War II, but we're coming out of the Depression. Kind of those worlds are colliding right then. So they're encouraging people to get back onto their feet, brush their teeth, comb their hair, engage in their community, get into sports, read books, go to your library. All things to promote the Commonwealth, to raise our country up. Visit the zoo. Be careful in the workforce. Don't get hurt. Aren't these something? So this is all at a time when these were drawn by hand. These are draftspeople and graphic artists, one letter at a time, hand drawing each one of those. This is before we had fonts and computers, of course. So they are hand drawing every letter on those. And that's why they look a little off kilter sometimes, or they're stretched a little bit. They're a little unique and full of character and personality. Couple more. Simple colors, because every color, again, represents a screen on your silkscreen press as they're laying those down. And as you can tell, focused on community. So in sum, there were 18 studios across the country where WPA employees, artists, were producing designs and printing those posters. They employed more than 500 people. They designed over 35,000 different designs, different posters, and printed more than 2 million of those. So quite prolific for a short 5-year time span in our American history. One of those purposes for the messaging and for those poster designs was tourism. So we're coming out of the Depression, people are getting back to work, and now let's encourage those people to spend some of that money, travel, and see this beautiful country again. So it's not necessarily going west like the railroads were compelling you to do, but visit your neighboring communities or your neighboring states or territories and see the wonderful communities and the economy bouncing back in our country. So here's some that are very specific, designed for Montana. Visit Montana, WPA posters. And then we land at the national park posters because these are probably the most familiar to most of us. You'll be very surprised to know that there were only 14 of them, in total done. But we know about them, and I'm going to explain why. Oh, and before I do, I forgot to mention, this is Dorothy Waugh. She was another designer, illustrator. I only learned about her about 6 months ago. She was employed by the National Park Service directly, not the WPA, from 1934 to 1936. So this is right before the WPA. But the National Park Service was already getting into the business of park promotion with these poster designs. And if you see her work, you'll see some very familiar themes that I want to say are sort of the template or the blueprint for these national park and WPA posters that would come after her. So I think we need to give her quite a bit of credit for being one of the roots of establishing this beautiful style that so many artists rolled with after her. And she had a long and storied career beyond the national parks. She did a lot of interpretive panels. She worked for state parks specifically. She was out of Massachusetts. And she did a lot of reference guides and things actually for the WPA, like guides and instruction manuals and whatnot. But her creative side was really quite profound. This is some more of her work, some of her state parks work. Just beautiful stuff. And that's Dorothy Waugh. So here's a studio in Minneapolis that was one of the 18 WPA studios, and a guy hard at work with many of those poster designs behind him. They were very busy. They got a lot done. And here's the national park posters, the ones that we're familiar with. Bandelier was the very last one designed. Yellowstone was one of the very first. And what would happen is the WPA art studios were set up, and they would send out messages to the directors directly to the national parks. And they would say, hey, we've got these studios set up. Are you interested in having us help you promote your park? And the directors, the superintendents of the national parks would write back to these studios and say, yes, I would like to order 500 posters promoting Glacier National Park. That's kind of how the transactions went. Typically, most orders were 300. On the max side, maybe 700 posters, because these were silk screened one at a time by hand. That's about how many they produced. And we have this guy to thank for those poster designs. This is C. Don Powell, Chester Don Powell. Almost completely forgotten to history until I'll tell you about another guy here coming up who rescued his name from obscurity. And because of this guy, there he is designing one of the Yosemite National Park posters. We have the national park posters because of him. So Don Powell started out in Chicago area. He was a graphic artist by trade, although they didn't call them graphic artists at the time. They called them commercial artists. And he was employed by the Wurlitzer Organ Company. And these are some of his early work in the 1930s. He and his wife decided to take a much-earned but delayed honeymoon out to the Bay Area, to San Francisco. And when they got there, they fell in love with the area, with Central California, and decided to put down roots there. So Chester Don Powell opened up his own advertising studio in San Francisco. And right away, his talent shines through. He got some pretty big-name clients, people like the Union Pacific Railroad and Shell Oil. So he enjoyed this work for just a couple of years, and then, of course, like everybody else, lost his work because of the Depression. Chester found work with the WPA first as a lineman with the railroads. So he was a flagman working on the rails for a time, for about a year and a half, and his foreman noticed some of the beautiful sketches and illustrations that he was doing on his lunch breaks and said, you're in the wrong place. We are squandering your talent here. You should go work in one of these WPA art studios. So he went to the one in Berkeley, California, one of the West Coast WPA studios. There he is with Dale Miller, who was a silkscreener artist, and that's Chester lining up the art on his silkscreen press. And as you can see in the background, they're printing the Glacier National Park WPA poster there. One at a time, laying down one color at a time. It was a slow and laborious process. But I want to think these guys are creative. They're artists. It was a passion project too, and they took a lot of pride in the work that they did. So these are two originals. We've got Lassen Volcano and Zion. These are images from the Library of Congress. These are the actual real posters that were printed, and that's what they look like. Maybe the papers yellowed a little bit over time, but they were vibrant and beautiful and very interpretive. There's some imagination going on. They're not literal like a photograph, but they communicate a lot in just a few words in a really compelling, beautiful image. A couple more of the originals. And here's some crazy facts about these. They only designed 14. And we don't have the proof, but we strongly believe that Chester Don Powell designed at least 9 of those 14 posters. There are only 42 of the original posters that have survived to today that we know of. Many of them, 12, are at the Library of Congress. They've been donated. Some are in private collections. And a few of them, like Grand Canyon National Park, they're actually at the visitor centers on display. So you can still go down there and see some of these original posters. But that's not very many when you think about the thousands and thousands that were printed. There are 2 posters that we know they designed, but no one to date has found an original version of those. How do we know they exist? Because we have negatives in black and white photos of these 2 posters. But if you happen to find one, if you're ever going into Grandma's attic cleaning things out and you find one of these, you're really sitting on a treasure there. So hopefully one of these will turn up one of these days. And maybe there was more than 14, but that's all we have documentation of that exist. Why? Because these were printed to be disposable. They're PSAs, remember. They get printed, they get stuck on a visitor center, on a telephone pole, and then it would rain 2 weeks later and they would rot and disintegrate, and that was basically the longevity of these over 2 million posters that were printed. So they didn't last long. They weren't designed to be kept. They weren't collector's items at the time, and so most of them are gone, unfortunately. But we have this guy to thank. This is Doug Lean, also known as Ranger Doug, and I have his book there on the table if you want to check it out. So Doug Lean was a dentist who worked in the Seattle area and then later in the Alaska territory. But he started out his career as a Park Service ranger, and he was specifically at Teton National Park, stationed at the Jenny Lake Ranger Station. And this is in about 1970, 1971. And That's what Jenny Lake looks like. Beautiful place if you haven't visited, worth seeing. And Doug was tasked with cleaning out a storage shed at the Jenny Lake Ranger Station in 1971. And as he was cleaning it out, he found this poster up in the rafters of this storage shed. And he couldn't stop looking at it. There was something compelling about this beautiful design. And he didn't know what it was. And I will let him explain it. Hopefully you guys can hear it a little better than I can. Here.
In 1971, I was a ranger in Grand Teton National Park. Once a year, everybody would show up in dirty clothes and we just clean up the park after the tourist leave. And I found an old poster in the barn. It piqued my curiosity. It was quite unique. The poster said, "Meet the Ranger at Jenny Lake Museum," which is where I work. I thought it was kind of cool, so I just take it home. And every time I walked by it, it kind of talked to me. The more I looked at this poster, the more I realized there was a story to be told.
The story of that poster would take Ranger Duran on a lifelong quest back through time. The Jenny Lake poster that he found is now part of a Roman collection of National Park posters.
In 1992, my supervisor in Grand Teton called me up and said, "We're looking for an poster idea." I said, "Well, I not only have a good idea, I got a poster," and I sent her a picture of it. She said, "Wow, it looks like one of these old government posters."
Lee made a call to a friend in Washington and found out his original poster was in fact a rare find. The National Park Service archive didn't have a single original poster. All they had were old negatives and black and white photographs. Lee, who now lives in rural Alaska, took those designs and started making reproductions and selling the posters.
My first main thrust was to restore the historic prints, to reprint them, so the public could enjoy them, and also to save these images. My second purpose or mission was to try to acquire these originals, buy them from rolling sellers, and then donate them to the National Park Service to rebuild this original set in its original form and put it back in the public domain.
Hopefully you guys could hear that, or at least snippets of it. So thanks to Doug Lean, we have these national park posters. If it wasn't for him, they almost certainly would have been lost to history. And there he is at the National Library of Congress with the ones that he has procured and donated to Library of Congress on display there. Not a lot of them. You know, and for many of these designs, many of these park posters, only one or two have ever been found. So I usually bring one of my big prints of Yellowstone with me, and I just didn't want to haul it over from Helena today. But there's only one in existence, one original of that design. There's only two of the Glacier National Park known to survive to today. So thank you to Doug Lean for his pilgrimage and his mission in life to find these and preserve them for our enjoyment. And as I'll show you, his company, his studio, which is based in Seattle, has gone on with some great artists to design new posters for many of those parks that didn't exist at the time of the WPA, places like Biscayne, or ones that were never produced, were never ordered by those national parks. So now he's gotten into the national monuments as well as the parks. Here's a few more. Just really beautiful artwork. Obviously, these are modern posters, but still with that same quality and the same style and typography as the original WPA designs. So there's a designer hard at work. That's also the Berkeley, California studio. These guys and women, it's men and women both, were really talented in many different facets. They were more than just illustrators or silkscreeners or painters. Here they are making dioramas and muralists. They were putting together exhibits for museums and visitor centers at the time. So that's another view of Chester Don Powell. You can see the painting of Jenny Lake behind him. And there he is constructing a 3D diorama for the visitor center at Jenny Lake. And as you can see from the finished piece, he used that for the shape and the style and the inspiration for the poster that he later designed in the WPA. Very, very talented people. Okay, I'm going to keep going. We'll do questions at the end, but I'm going to switch gears here a little bit and talk about the graphic design component of this as well. So we're going to dissect one of these posters and talk about the elements and the color and the composition. So what I like to do as a graphic artist when I'm looking at other people's work or when I'm seeking out things for my own inspiration or my own ideas, I like to visualize sort of a window and putting up that art into that window frame and blocking out everything else outside of that. So I'm just focused on the design, on the components, the elements of one of those posters. So let's put in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park poster there. This is one of the ones that has never been found, one of the originals. These colors are estimated by Ranger Doug Enterprises as what they may have looked like, but we really don't know. We only have a black and white copy. Now let's break this down into the essential components of this design. So if we first remove the typography, we are left with this very simple, iconic visual element here. We've got trees, we've got a mountain in the background, we've got sort of a steep cliff on the right-hand side and a road leading into this design. Pretty simple elements. If we strip the color out, now you're seeing sort of the contrast, the foreground and the background elements. These are all very carefully and deliberately placed by the artist, probably Chester Don Powell. And this is graphic design 101 here. These are techniques. What he's created here is visual entry points into this design. A design and a layout that is crafted to compel the viewer to look into this scene. So in the photography world, we might call that leading lines. So as you can see, we start with the road typically. It brings you into that scene. Those tall trees on the left, raise your eye up to the top of the poster. That mountain in the background, further your eye up to that top right corner. And then that slope brings your eye back down. This is appealing to our basic brain and vision function. Our eyes like to do that circular motion, usually starting in the bottom, or if it's not a circle, our eyes like to make a Z, starting in the upper left like we're reading a book and making our way back down to the bottom right corner. So these elements are designed to facilitate that, to encourage your eye to move about that design. So here we are, again, with the type added. So now, as you can see, maybe that icon in the middle, the little logo at the bottom center, the Department of the Interior logo, that's your starting point. And then that road leads you into the design, the trees raise you up to the most important type at the top, naturalist service. Emphasize that upward motion, then the cliff brings you back down to read the details. Oh, we're talking about Great Smoky Mountains. And then Department of Interior, National Park Service. So there it is again in its entirety. So with that in mind, and with those leading lines and that structure, that composition, do you think that this image would make a good national park poster, a good starting place? I see a lot of heads shaking no. Why is that? Yeah, it's frenetic energy, isn't it? There's no entry points. There's no place for your eye to aesthetically start and move your way around. It's just busyness. It's pretty wheat stalks, but it doesn't make a good poster. How about this one? Would that work? Yeah, right. It's got, an entry point leading in. It's got space at the top for type, space at the bottom to continue your message. Lots of visual motion there. How about this one? Yeah, again, it's very busy. There's no starting point for your eye. But how about this one? Yes, Mount Fuji would make a great national park poster. Japanese national park poster. But. Okay, so that's the composition and the visual elements of a poster. Now let's strip those out. Well, first, in photography, we call it sort of the rule of thirds, if you will. These designs loosely follow that, where we've got the visual elements, the landscape scene in the middle third, it's a little more than a third, and then the type in the upper and lower thirds of this image. Most of the national park posters and many of the WPA designs also follow this principle, or they have a visual or a vertical line that kind of separates stuff and it's more columnar. That's kind of the main two compositions of these designs, as you'll see. Now let's strip out the visuals and just look at the type. What do you guys notice about this? What is it? Bold, yes. Very bold lettering. Easy to read, right? Very legible. Hand-drawn, obviously. I mean, if you look at, let's say, the A in park at the bottom versus the A in naturalist, you can see how the artist has stretched out those letters in park to fill that space and kind of create some visual balance or equity on there. So these are all one letter at a time drawn. The style is what we call Art Deco. And there's a little bit of Art Nouveau in there too. This was a very contemporary style of the 1930s, of course, in architecture, in art, even in theater. It started in the late 1800s in Europe, France mostly, and made its way as a beautiful aesthetic style that we appreciated here in the States too. So a lot of those letters are in that Art Deco style. Here are some modern computer fonts today that are also all considered Art Deco. As you can see, they have a lot of character. They have a lot of personality. We're not talking about Helvetica or Arial or Times New Roman here. They have character and they exude personality. So they relied on that stylistic design for their typography. And you'll see a lot more of that examples in some of the other examples. Here are some of the modern fonts that I use when I'm kind of designing in that WPA style. They'll probably look familiar to what you see in those national park posters. These are all contemporary fonts that you can purchase and use yourself. So, another question for you guys. How many colors are in this poster design? Anybody want to guess? 12, okay. 5, I heard 3. We're getting close. 4, now you got it. There are 4 colors of ink in this design. So we use the white of the paper, or the artist did, as a 5th color. I mean, it serves its purpose as like snowy peaks there in the mountain design, but we've got that sort of medium blue that defines the mountains. We've got the gray sort of shadows in that mountain range, the lighter blue that serves as additional highlights in the mountains as well as the water and the sky, and then that real dark kind of forest green for the type and the shoreline there at the edge of the lake. So every one of those colors represents a color of ink that was laid down in the silkscreen process, or serigraphy we call it, one color at a time. How might they have done this? If we have any silk screeners in the room, you're probably going to correct me, but I'll show you. So that's all the colors there, and that's what we call a color palette for a design. So they may have printed it like this. They may have laid down that light blue first for the background and the sky color and the water. They probably did a little better job than what I'm demonstrating here in Photoshop. The next color they may have laid down was that medium blue, the mountain features and some of the type. Then they would have laid in those gray sort of highlights or shadows, if you will. And lastly, that darkest color, that dark forest green for the rest of the type in the shoreline. So here's another color palette. Most of these national park posters were printed with between 3 and 7 colors. So 7-color design is pretty darn ambitious because that's a lot of colors to lay down. But many of them did have 7 colors. So here's the classic beautiful Yellowstone one. That many colors there. Mesa Verde, also 6-color design. Real vibrant, high contrast colors there. Just setting off and playing off of that beautiful turquoise of the Southwest and the sandstone colors. Really nice. Jewel Cave, doing an underground sort of reverse color, utilizing all of those dark blues and then this bright yellow and white for light and for highlights there. Every one of these represents a color of ink. So how do we do it today in modern graphic design? I can show you one technique that I use, and I cheat and I use a computer because I use a computer 95% of the time these days. When I was in college, we still didn't have computers. I was still working at a draft table with my technical pens and my X-Acto knives and cutting film. But as soon as I graduated, that sort of the computer revolution happened in about late 1980s, and I had to sink or swim and learn my computer. So today, let's say we wanted to get a color palette out of this beautiful image. Well, what I would do using Photoshop is I would first pixelate it, if you will, kind of break it down into these blocky pixels or chunks of color that still make up that image. And then I would further pixelate it and then pluck out a couple of the colors that I see common, or maybe some highlight contrast accent colors. And from there, I just drag those colors out and create my palette. That's kind of how we do it today. So there's a color palette for that photo. I'm going to play one more video, and this is just a little chunk from Ranger Doug Studios to demonstrate how they actually print these posters. I really hope you can hear it.
Enjoy this job so much, despite the fact that it might not be the most profitable for us, it's not really a profit center, is because it's more artistic, it's something that we can feel really proud of. You get to point at details and crafts.
That's a modern silkscreen machine there, squeegeeing the art.
But it's a lot more fun, it's like putting that higher level of technique. And it's something that we know a lot of our competitors will just not even try.
Screen printing has either nylon or other fabric that is stretched across a framework. Basically, where the fabric is, the ink can be forced through the mesh of the fabric. We take and find our ideal size screen that will fit our film for the particular job. If it's not coated, we will coat it with light-sensitive emulsion. After we get the film in the right spot, we will take it to the exposure unit and expose it to UV light. And then once it's done, what I call baking, we will take it into the sink, in our washout sink, and wash out the unexposed stencil, or at least unexposed emulsion. And once we've got that washed out, then we have our true stencil. Once we have the screen dried off, we will then take what we call block out and make sure that we've got the screen all nice and ready to be put on press without there being any pinholes or spots where the ink shouldn't go through, where we don't want it to. We give it to the press operator and let them do the real magic.
I think art and creativity have been inspired by nature for millennia, whether it's cave painting, houseboat, and natural species of lions or wild horses, and 20, 30,000 years ago, and we're still being inspired by nature. But as stewards, I think we need to make sure that we take care of the places that inspire us, and that needs to go more than skin deep.
There are places that are more important than making profit. If we destroy them, then they're gone.
Yeah. That's the process of how they do it. As you can see from some of those older photos during the WPA time, they were using hand squeegees and laying down those screens and dragging that ink through there. It wasn't mechanized like it is today. But again, thank you, Ranger Doug, for saving us and sharing the National Park poster culture with America today. So we're getting to the end. I wanted to show you a few takes on those national park designs that people have done since then. This is a series of posters commissioned by the National Park Service about 8-9 years ago. encouraging people to visit the parks and enjoy their nighttime beauty as well, to see the stars and the Milky Way and all the colors and nightlife that appear after dark. Here's a fun take, a Lord of the Rings series of WPA National Park posters that someone designed. Here's a environmental take on what could happen to our national parks with climate change. Here is the Green New Deal, more of a political movement using that style to promote today's message. I think those are just incredibly beautiful, well-rendered designs. They're really inspiring. I'd love to get my hands on some of those. Very nice. Here's some Star Wars themed national park posters. You could really do any, with these styles. And then lastly, I just wanted to share with you, here's a couple that I'm in the middle of designing. These are my works, and I'm kind of taking upon myself to design national park poster style for all of Montana's state parks. And I'm about, 15 into these. I visit the park, I take photos, and then I use my photos as the basis for my designs here. And so hopefully one of these days when I save a little money and get a little farther into this project, I would like to have these posters and maybe some postcards and stuff available at like state park visitor centers and at our new museum. So that's what I'm working on. For reference, I have 2 books here at this main table where Edna's sitting. This one on the left is by Doug Lean, Ranger Doug, and it tells his complete story much more in depth than I can about those WPA art studios and the national park posters specifically. On the right is posters of the people produced in conjunction with the Library of Congress that has hundreds of the awesome WPA posters that were produced within its pages. So I encourage you to leaf through those on your way out. So that's all I have. So thank you very much. And really appreciate your time, and happy to answer any questions if you raise your hand.
I'm just going to turn on the light real quick so I can see people a little. Okay.
Or comment.
Any questions? Yeah.
I am not an artist, but I notice a theme on most of those posters that you showed us. And the theme for my unartist eyes is dull colors. And I'm wondering why vibrant colors weren't used in, or am I seeing some vibrant colors? It seems like everything's kind of toned down and browns and dark blues and things like that. And why not vibrant colors? When did those come in?
So my gut instinct on that, and I don't know if this is a truthful answer, but my gut instinct on that is if you look back to classical art from the 1400s up to the 1800s, you'll notice that a lot of those paintings also have that sort of dull patina to them. I think some of that has to do with the pigments that they were able to achieve and mix at that time, the materials and minerals that they used for those colors. In today's world, if you think about acrylic paint and some of the inks that we can produce, they're using a lot of plastic and a lot of new chemical developments that get those super bright neon colors almost and that real vibrancy that they simply couldn't achieve back then. So I think that's part of the answer, and I also think a lot of these posters that we're looking at are 75, close to 100 years old, and they've probably faded a little bit with time as well, and that could be part of the factor. Both just guesses. If anybody else has a comment or a thought, Edna, yes. I'd love to hear what you think about that as well. I'm not a painter, so.
I'm not a painter either. I hired a guy to do my house last summer because I wasn't going to do that. But I think that's such an interesting question because I see the colors as vibrant, but also what strikes me is that these are all posters that are advertising natural areas. So they're taking the color palette from nature, which can be more subdued, but then, come see the leaves of Maine in the fall, they could make it pop. But like Luke says, they didn't have the technology back then. They didn't have the resources. But that leads me to my next question, which was when they chose a palette, they have 6 or 7 colors for, like the Jenny Lake poster. If there was a light green and a dark green, they had to use 2 different inks, 2 different screens. Nowadays, you make part of the screen that's light green, you make it 10% strength of the same ink, and you get a second color.
That's correct.
So even that technology wasn't available to them back then, and whatever technology is available tends to kind of dictate the style in a lot of ways.
Really good point. And the limited knowledge that I have about silk screening too, if you see modern silk screen designs, like T-shirts and whatnot, you'll see a lot of color gradation and a lot of colors fading into other colors. And the way they achieve that with their squeegee on a printing press is, like Edner said, you might have a dark blue color here, and then you lay down some light blue color ink here, and then you just press your squeegee and you let those inks mix as they press through the screen. What I'm curious about, though, is we never see that technique in those national park posters. You never see those gradations from one color to another. I don't know why that is, because they could have done it back then. And then another point to make also, we've talked about silkscreen all evening. A lot of the WPA posters, about half of them, were actually printed with a lithography press, which is closer to our modern day commercial printing presses, where they would actually etch stone, lay down ink, and then press the paper against those. And then later lithography was the drums like we see in a modern printing press, like when you see newspapers get printed and stuff. So they were creating more of those gradations and more color variants. We just, in this talk, are mainly focusing on silkscreen. But it is important to know that a lot of those WPA posters were printed with ink, not silkscreen ink as well. Thank you. What a great point.
Offering just a minor addition, at the time, state of printing, not only big machines, but letterpress printing, where they are using single letters. They can't do a lot of the split tones when your copy, your characters have to be that one piece of lead character.
Yes.
You can't split in that. You can do it over a larger area, but the rollers cover the whole form at that.
Excellent point, yeah. Are most of you familiar with letterpress? So that's the original, going back to the Gutenberg press, when letters would be placed either wood or metal type, one letter at a time on these trays, they called them, or these guides to, and that's how the early newspapers and whatnot were printed, and books. So Ben Franklin created one of the first letterpress here in the U.S. Thank you for bringing that up. Good point.
Luke, why weren't there more posters, and were there other standards like postcards or something else that was out there? And then second part of the question, is there a renaissance now in desiring these posters to come back?
I think so. Let me answer the second part of your question first. So I gave a workshop a couple months ago at the Holter Museum of Art, where half of it was this presentation, but then everybody who was in attendance at the workshop got to design and create and build their own poster in this style. And I think that to me indicates there's a lot of interest in that, in recreating the style, trying it out yourself. I think there's a renaissance in that. There is an uptick in people using silkscreen presses. I see a lot of silkscreen classes these days in colleges and art museums. And people just frankly love this style. It's challenging, it's hard to recreate, but we all love it. I mean, there's some aesthetic appeal that we don't want to quit it. So I think there is a renaissance right now. And with modern day techniques, you see those like Green New Deal designs. They can kind of take it to the next level that the artists back in the 1930s couldn't. To answer the first part of your question, why wasn't there more? Why weren't they doing postcards and whatnot? The main point of that is that, as I mentioned, these artists were doing more than just poster designs. They were also tasked with building signage and dioramas and museum exhibits. So they had their hands full, and they were not thinking in terms of commercialism. They weren't thinking in terms of mailing postcards out or selling those in the gift stores. So it probably just didn't occur to them to make that. But the big reason there wasn't more of it is simple economics. The WPA started in the late 1930s. They cranked out all of those posters, but then the war started. And most of these artists, including Chester Don Powell, found they could make a lot more money moving to the shipyards in the South and building battleships for World War II. And that was kind of the end of the WPA art studios, was the war. Everybody left because they needed to make a living.
So your last comment kind of catches me by surprise a little bit, because I, before I even showed up here, thought some of these artists would have ended up doing posters for World War II,
Yeah.
like employed by, we didn't have the Department of Defense, I don't think then, but like the Department of the Army.
Yep.
And then how many people in this room are thinking like I am that there might be some of these posters sitting up in Polson at the Museum of America?
Oh, if somebody wants to make a drive up there, yeah.
Oh, I've probably been 8 or 10 times. The next time I go, I'm going to really keep my eyes peeled on the walls and in their just poster boards.
Yeah. I wish I had an answer for you, because obviously there was military printing and recruitment and patriotism and propaganda. There was a lot of propaganda posters.
I thought
being
people
printed.
would have rolled, at least a portion of these people, just
Yeah.
knowing some of the war posters,
Yeah.
that they would have rolled right into being an artist for
Yes.
the U.S. Army or something like that.
What I don't know the answer to is if some of those people migrated. I know it wasn't the WPA studios because they basically folded. But where were they being printed? I mean, was it in Washington, D.C.? Was it in studios around the country? I need to learn more about that. I'd like to find out.
And then just go into the music thing. Did you go to the Little Feat documentary? Neon Park, the artist,
Oh, yeah.
that Little Feat album from the 70s, Feats Don't Fail Me Now, could have been, if you take a few things out of it, a national park poster.
Yes.
And that was the first thing that popped in my mind, was like, who's still doing things? Because you went into band posters that were very detailed, but if you
Yeah.
go back to the 70s, Neon Park on that one, especially Feats Don't Fail Me
Yes.
Now, is with George Washington and Marilyn Monroe driving the car.
Yes, exactly.
That totally could be like a Glacier Park going to the Sun Road with lightning in the background.
So if you guys are ever interested, I have an entirely different presentation. It's about the same length, and it's all about album cover art and graphic design, because that's my other passion. If you want to come sit with me again, invite me back, and I'll give that presentation. And I talk about, I talk about how some of those album covers were clearly inspired by the WPA. There's definitely direct lineage with some of that inspiration, especially in the 60s and 70s. So yeah, excellent point. So bring me back. I'll talk about album covers. Any other questions?
I just double checked it, but that Hayden expedition, I thought that was the one. If people are into history, it wasn't, though. It was a previous Yellowstone expedition where a guy from the expedition got lost.
Oh, Coulter. Yeah.
No, for like 30-something days. And he thought he was dead.
That's
It was a
right.
previous one. Yeah, it was like a year or two before. And it was like, boy, you'd think that would have scared anybody.
Can you imagine? Jeez.
Yeah, just another history thing with that
Yeah.
Hayden. I thought it was Hayden. It was something before that. But it was a wild story.
Yeah, it's really something. Coulter was part of the Hayden expedition, and he came back for Coulter's run, but it was after, I believe so, yeah. Again, I'm not a historian, I'm a graphic artist, but I need to get my facts straight. I'm going to look into that.
Thanks so much for the presentation, because it made me realize the power of picture, the power of graphics. And it's kind of interesting to see all these portrayals of beauty and nature and aspirational peace, and yet compelling you to explore the natural world. I'm a retired builder, and I found 3 or 4 World War II posters that were propaganda posters. And the power of those posters was just scary.
Yeah.
And they were all over the place, compelling us to see an enemy and taking normal human beings and turning them into evil things so that we could destroy them. It was so interesting because these weren't necessarily people of color. The Japanese, of course, but these were white Aryan Germans, many of them living in Montana.
Oh, yes.
And then we were told to kill them, to
You
destroy
had an
them.
internment camp right here in Missoula.
Yeah, yeah. So it's interesting. I'm just trying to find a parallel today of what graphically is going on in our culture today to compel us to do something. Can you address that?
That's a tough question. Well, what I think is it's moved from the static image to the TikTok video and or the YouTube video, and we certainly have our share of propaganda, probably more now than ever. And it serves to demonize just as it did during the war effort, for sure. Especially when you look at the right and the left of politics these days. We demonize those people. I mean, look at the hell that Pelosi has gone through, and conversely, the hell that we portray Trump as. But it's certainly there. It's just in video pictures now. It's in motion, I think. But one thing about that, like you probably, those posters you have, you probably stared at them and absorbed all the elements over a period of time, and they stick with you that way. That's how my brain works. When I watch a video, it's just clear, but it can be easily discarded. Yeah, it's very temporal and very temporary. And so maybe it doesn't have the impact of a Hitler poster or something like that, or, Japanese dive bombers or something. Really good point. Or, going back even before that, the depictions of slavery and black people in America was horrible propaganda. Those images stick with me, I tell you that.
Okay, we're just going to do maybe a couple more questions and then wrap it up.
I was wondering, I'm from Great Falls, and I really like that Giant Springs
Yes.
poster. Did you do that?
I did, yeah.
Okay, is that available in Helena?
Not quite yet. I'm still, let me show you my problem with these. They're still a little busy to be in that true WPA style. So I'm going to simplify them even more and make them more like they were silk screened before I put these out for sale. I think I can do a better job.
I think they're gorgeous.
Well, thank you.
Very nice.
I appreciate it. I'll let you know.
Okay, well, thank you. I'm sure if you have more questions, I would be happy if you came up or said hi. Sorry, just say that for you. Remember, next month, same day, the 24th, we're going to have a talk on the Mexican-American War. So come back for that. Thanks.
Thank you all. Thank you.